What is going on, guys? It's Jack Gillis 1875 here, and today I'll be doing the video that was overwhelmingly voted for by you guys on the Twitter poll, and that is the Bundesliga table if each club had their squad from 10 years ago. This is going to be a really interesting one. I'm glad you guys picked this idea because it's a video that I'm really looking forward to doing. Hope you enjoy watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. So before we jump into it, few rules for this. First of all, as with all these types of videos, purely based on my opinion. If you have a different idea, if you put the teams elsewhere in the table, please get involved in the discussion down in the comments. I love it when I hear from you guys and you guys get involved in the discussion. Secondly, for this to work, we've got to imagine that the squads from 10 years ago went in a time machine, have moved to now. Now the club still have the same backroom team, but they have their players from 10 years ago. This is how it's going to work. They have the same backroom staff, the same structure in the boardroom and everything, and they have the same manager, but they have their squad from 10 years ago. They've jumped in a time machine and they've come to the present day. So this is going to be really, really interesting. We'll be starting at the bottom of the table and working our way up. I hope you enjoy it. Let's jump right into it. So coming 18th, dead last in this table is, and I suppose this will be a big shock for everybody, is RB Leipzig. Yep, in this world, RB Leipzig would be getting relegated to the Zweite Bundesliga because this time 10 years ago, RB Leipzig were in the Regionalliga Nordost, the 4th division, and had come third in the Regionalliga Nordost, failed to get promoted to the Dritte Liga, and had a squad of what I'd say were decidedly average 4th division players. Nobody really knew who RB Leipzig were at this point. The great big experiment hadn't really taken off. So they had a squad of decidedly average 4th division players who 10 years ago on this day were drawn 0-0 Hallischer FC as opposed to being in the Champions League. Even the genius of Julian Nagelsmann could not keep this squad in the Bundesliga. They are 4th division players, they're semi-professional players, they're not staying in the Bundesliga. A lot of them these days are either retired or are playing for very, very low league clubs or have went back to play in the 2nd division in Austria. A lot of them came through Red Bull Salzburg. So it's basically a squad of 4th division and lower league journeymen and Red Bull Salzburg rejects. So RB Leipzig have come a long way in 10 years, but even with the genius of Julian Nagelsmann, with that squad, they would be getting relegated to the Zweite Bundesliga dead last. And I'm going to go out on a limb, given the fact that these are semi-professional players, that they'd equal or beat Tasmania's record low points as well. Going to put that out there. So there you go. It's getting pretty crazy right off the bat. We'll now move on to who comes 17th in this table. So coming in at 17th, and joining RB Leipzig and getting relegated to the Zweite Bundesliga is Arminia Bielefeld. Now this is a club you'd expect to see getting relegated, and with their squad 10 years ago, it's really not a surprise. So 10 years ago, Arminia Bielefeld were sitting 13th in the Dritte Liga, the 3rd division, and had a band of decidedly average mid-table Dritte Liga players who were good enough to keep Arminia Bielefeld in the 3rd division and sort of comfortably mid to lower table. But in the Bundesliga, they get absolutely ripped to shreds. The only thing keeping them off bottom is the fact that RB Leipzig players are semi-professional. So Arminia Bielefeld, and quite a few points adrift to 16th, I'll say as well, would be joining RB Leipzig and getting relegated to the Zweite Bundesliga. Now, a few of these Arminia Bielefeld players are still around today. Ortega, for one, their long-serving goalkeeper, has stayed at the club for the 10 years. But 10 years ago, Arminia Bielefeld were just a bang average mid-table Dritte Liga team and would be joining RB Leipzig and firmly getting relegated to the Zweite Bundesliga. Now going to move on to who comes 16th in this league. So coming in 16th, which is the playoff spot, is Union Berlin. Now, I'm saying this begrudgingly as a Hertaner. This season, Union Berlin have surpassed all expectation and are blowing the Bundesliga away. They're sitting in a European spot. But with their squad 10 years ago, they'd be coming 16th and having to face the dreaded relegation playoff. Now, do you think they'd win the playoff? Tell me in the comments down below. I'd like to hear from you guys on that one. But Union Berlin 10 years ago were coming 7th in the Zweite Bundesliga, and even then that was considered lucky. Their squad was quite unbalanced. They had some really shockingly poor results that season and were lucky to find themselves mid-table. Earlier on in the season they found themselves looking like they were going to be facing a relegation scrap, but they managed to haul themselves into 7th. Luckily, even with the tactical genius and financially shrewd manager that is Urs Fischer and the setup that Union Berlin have now, this squad would just struggle in the Bundesliga. They're not Bundesliga material. They were even lucky to be mid-table in the Zweite Bundesliga. So it would be a struggle for Union Berlin, but how poor RB Leipzig and Arminia Bielefeld were 10 years ago is going to keep Union out of the automatic relegation places and in the playoff. Now, like I said, I want to hear from you guys. Do you think they'd stay up for the playoff? Personally, all depend on who came third. If it was Holstein, Kiel or Fürth, they maybe would, but if it was Hamburg, I don't think they get relegated. So tell me in the comments, theoretically, do you think your Union side could win in the playoff? I don't think they could. Like I said, decidedly average Zweite Bundesliga players that were lucky to even get 7th that year. Only thing keeping them out of automatic relegation is the fact that I will say, because Urs Fischer is the manager, and the fact that Arminia Bielefeld and RB Leipzig were both so poor 10 years ago. So there we go. Now moving on to who'd come 15th. So coming 15th in this league is Mainz. Now Mainz actually came 13th in the Bundesliga 10 years ago. But considering that they'd have today's manager, Bo Svensson, who has managed to get a perfectly good Mainz squad into a relegation scrap, I'd say they'd come 15th and just miss out in the playoff. Union would have just picked them to the post of the playoff. This was a very decent Mainz side. There was a lot of good young players, but with the standard of some of the other teams here and the fact that they have now's manager Bo Svensson, I'd think they'd be flirting with relegation but would eventually keep themselves up. Safety 15th. But like I say, narrowly avoid out on the playoff. It would either be by a point or on goal difference that Union would be in the playoff against them, because it would be very, very tight. Like I said, Mainz had some very decent players back then, but with Bo Svensson and the circus show that is Mainz's boardroom right now, I hate to say it, but Mainz would not do as well as they did 10 years ago. 10 years ago's squad would just and no more have safety in 15th. We're now going to move on to who'd come 14th. So in 14th, we have 1. FC Köln. Now, those of you that will know your Bundesliga will go, Jack, but 10 years ago, Köln got relegated. I think that was very, very harsh, their relegation in 2011. They were a very, very good side. They didn't have the right manager. This season, they have Markus Gisdol, who is a fantastic manager, kept what was, I'd say, a poor Köln side up last season and is doing decently with them this season. With that squad from 10 years ago, Markus Gisdol's managerial genius, I'd say, and good at keeping teams up. He's a good fireman. And that squad from 10 years ago, Köln would comfortably stay up in 14th. I think no problems, no questions asked. Gisdol would keep the Köln team from 10 years ago up, because they had some decent players. They had Michael Isak, they had Chong Tae-se, the North Korea international. They had Mark Uth, who's a young Mark Uth, not the old one that's toiling at Schalke. They had some very, very decent players. And I just think that Köln would easily stay up. No problems at all. They also have Lucas Podolski in that team. He didn't play as much of a role, but still, it's Lucas Podolski, Gisdol. I think they'd stay up. So there you go. I think that was a bit of a wild card one, a bit controversial. We're now going to move on to who'd come 13th in this league. So the team that would come 13th in this league are Augsburg, which isn't too much of a change from where Augsburg would normally come. 10 years ago, Augsburg came 14th in the Bundesliga and had a decent squad that really deserved to be where they were. They had some decent players. Dawid Ba, the Gambia international, Axel Bringenhausen, who I'd say is probably one of those German players that was unlucky never to get called up. They had Gabriel Sanko, who is a cap player for Sierra Leone numerous times. They had some decent players, but you know, they were a decidedly average mid to lower table squad back in the day. And the only reason I'm putting them 13th is a matter of them and Köln. It's not really much to split them. So I decided just to swap them around and put Augsburg in at 13th. I think it'd be a matter of a few points or even goal difference between Köln and Augsburg. Like I said, decidedly average mid-table team with Heiko Herrlich. Now, he'd managed them to mid-table, and not much would really have changed for Augsburg in 10 years. Make that what you will. It's either showing that the club are consistent or it's incredibly depressing. It's one of the two. We're now going to move on to who'd come 12th in this league. So in at 12th, we have Hoffenheim. Now, Hoffenheim 10 years ago actually came 11th in the Bundesliga. So again, not much of a difference from where they were 10 years ago. But I've put them 12th because there's clubs around them and clubs above them I think with the current manager would do better. Now, Hoffenheim were a very decent team 10 years ago. Again, just your average mid-table team who are just mid-table players. The mid-table players are consistent, they'll get a job done, they'll get into mid-table, but I think they come 12th because there's teams around them and above them that would just do better with the current manager. That's my reasoning behind it. Apart from that, you had some very decent players in the team like Andreas Beck, Tobias Strobel, Sebastian Rudy, decent mid-table players that are going to get a job done for you as well, including a little wildcard Liechtenstein international Sandro Wieser, who was meant to be the next big thing and turned out doing nothing in the Hoffenheim squad. But then again, apart from that, decent mid-table players, like I was saying, who would get them into 12th. And I'm only saying that purely because there's teams above them with the current managers, they do better and teams around them. So that is that. We're now going to move on to who'd come 11th in this league. So coming 11th in this league is Eintracht Frankfurt. Now this is one of my very controversial choices. I'm sure a lot of you will disagree with. Eintracht Frankfurt 10 years ago came second in the Zweite Bundesliga and came up after a bit of a shock spell in the Zweite Bundesliga. They came second and got promoted. Were unlucky not to come up with the title actually. Now, a lot of you will be saying, why have you put Eintracht Frankfurt in 11th then? I genuinely think they had a decent squad then. They had a decent squad with a lot of players that are actually Bundesliga level. I think under Adi Hütter, that squad could get dragged kicking and screaming to mid-table or near mid-table in 11th. I genuinely think the squad from 10 years ago with Adi Hütter as manager would have got dragged kicking and screaming in 11th. It was very unfair that they were in the Zweite Bundesliga back then. I think in this league, with the teams below them and the standard they're at, with Adi Hütter, who is a tactical genius as their manager, they get dragged kicking and screaming in 11th. Definitely. No questions asked. And I know that it's a bit of a controversial wild card one there, but definitely I'm going to say Eintracht Frankfurt 11th. Adi Hütter would just get them there. He's a great manager. Now going to move on to who'd come 10th in this league. So coming 10th in this league is Hertha Berlin. Now, a lot of people will be saying that no, the Bundesliga Jack, you're just being biased because Hertha came 16th that season. I genuinely think it was down to awful management and there was a lot going on upstairs at the boardroom level as well that season. With Paul Dardai and a steady backroom team that's in place now, this squad could easily get mid-table. You had some really decent players, Ebert, Lustenberger, guys that are solid workhorses that would get a team into 10th. These are the sorts of players that Paul Dardai likes to work with, and I genuinely think in this Bundesliga with some of the other dross that's below Hertha, I genuinely think that Dardai could drag Hertha, a bit like Adi Hütter with the Eintracht Frankfurt team. Paul Dardai could drag Hertha kicking and screaming into a mid-table position. There's some decent players there, the aggression's there, the passion was there. Just needed the right manager. If Dardai and the current backroom team were there back then, definitely 10th. In this world, they're coming 10th. It was a no-brainer for me. Maybe you think I'm being a bit biased. Maybe you'll disagree. Who knows? That's for you to discuss in the comments. There we go. Hertha coming 10th. We're now going to move on to who'd come 9th in this league. So coming 9th in this league is SC Freiburg. Now, 10 years ago, Freiburg came 12th. I've got to say, it is a 12th place squad. There was a lot of young and inexperienced players, and then just, your average sort of journeyman that you'd expect from these sorts of teams. But again, it's all down to their current manager. Christian Streich would get this team places. I think he'd whip them into shape, and luckily, I'd say, a bit of luck, he'd move them into 9th, definitely. could definitely see that happening. It's a decent squad. They'd get ninth under Christian Streich. There's not much I could say about it. That's my only reasoning, is Christian Streich was the manager. If it was anybody else, I'd have actually kept them in 12th or maybe moved them a little bit lower. But because Christian Streich's the manager and he's good at working with these sorts of players, he'd get the team from 10 years ago into a good place and into ninth. Obviously, get them working hard. Now, the one player I would say is Matthias Ginter, who is obviously doing very well at Mönchengladbach these days. That's a player he'd be working with, and I think, definitely Streich would get this team ninth. Like I said, only reason I'm saying that is purely because of Streich. If not, they would definitely be down in 12th. So there we go. We're now going to move on to who'd come 8th in this league. Coming 8th in this league, we have Verda Bremen. Now, 10 years ago, Verda Bremen came 9th. And just like the story of these sorts of teams back then is they had a decidedly average mid-table squad. For all the Scottish football fans out there, 10 years ago, Verda Bremen had Rangers' Leon Balogun as well. Just like to put that out there. But there was just nothing about this Verda Bremen team. They were not good enough to get into European places, yet they weren't bad enough to end up in the lower half of the table. They had some decent players. The most notable was Wesley, the Brazilian midfielder, Janizovic as well, Austrian, again another decent midfielder. They actually had a very decent midfield that season, Verda. And I think, you know what, they'd get into 8th because of the standard of what's around them. They would just get bumped up one place, but there was nothing special about the Verda Bremen side, and nothing even today. Actually they're better off back then than they were now. Verda are currently sitting 12th in the current Bundesliga table, and they're not exactly, nothing special. Like I said, not good enough for European football, not bad enough for lower half of the table, so they just solidly slot in there in 8th. So there we go. We're now going to move on to who'd come 7th in this league. So in at 7th and the Europa League qualification spot, we have Wolfsburg. Now, Wolfsburg 10 years ago actually came 8th in the Bundesliga, but with Oliver Glasner, today's manager, in charge, I think he could take what was a very decent squad into the European qualification place, into the Europa League qualification place, and I think they'd get to the playoff round and maybe get beat by somebody like Celtic or AEK Athens or something like that. So Wolfsburg back then were actually very decent. They came 8th, solid club, had some really good players that have went on to have great careers. Most of them are retired now, Schaefer for example, but Wolfsburg were a very decent team back then, and I think with Glasner in charge, they definitely in this league get into 7th, then get decently into Europa League qualifying. Like I said, Celtic or AEK Athens would probably put them out in the playoff round, and they'd end up in the Conference League, because obviously that entitles you to the Conference League nowadays. So Wolfsburg I think would have a little decent outing in Europe with their squad from 10 years ago as well. But focusing on the Bundesliga, they come 7th with Glasner in charge. Again, not much of a difference. It's all very tight around there. It's matters of points, I think this would happen by with most of these decisions in this league, or matter of goal difference as well. But Wolfsburg would get into that all-important European qualification place. So that is Wolfsburg. We're now going to move on to who'd come 6th in this league. So coming 6th in this league, we have Bayer Leverkusen. Now, this one's going to be a little bit controversial because this was personal choice. I decided to flip them with Stuttgart, which I'll talk about when I move on to Stuttgart, who I'd actually put 5th, spoiler alert. So Leverkusen actually came 5th 10 years ago, but I think Stuttgart, in my mind, would actually really edge them out. So it was a matter of a point in that season 10 years ago. I'm going to say that for now. Bayer Leverkusen were a very, very good team back then. They had some great players, Danny Da Costa, Bender, Friedrich, Obchipka, Rolfs, Ortega, brilliant players that really helped them get into that all-important Europa League spot. They did decently in the Europa League that year, as Bayer Leverkusen normally do. So it's not too much of a difference for Bayer Leverkusen. That team of 10 years ago would solidly get them into European football in 6th. No questions asked for me, absolutely. That's what I'm going to say for Bayer Leverkusen. all down to personal choice here. Their squad back then was decent, but I think the Stuttgart squad in my mind was just a more interesting, exciting team to watch. So that's why I've put Stuttgart 5th. So without further ado, we'll now move on to 5th place, who we already know is going to be Stuttgart. But anyway, let's move on and let's cut to Stuttgart. So coming 5th in this league, as we discussed previously, is Stuttgart. Like I said, this one was purely based on personal opinion. Stuttgart 10 years ago were a very exciting team to watch, and their squad from 10 years ago could easily get 5th in that last Europa League spot, and I think they'd narrowly miss out on getting 4th in Champions League. They were a very, very good team. You had players like Rudiger in there, Molinaro, the Italian, Sake, the Japanese player, all very exciting players. And I think it was just an exciting Stuttgart team to watch back in the day. They were an honestly fantastic team to watch. And that's where my personal preference comes into it, that I really would have liked to have seen the Stuttgart team come 5th. They were just a really decent team and they deserved to come 5th. Like I said, there wasn't really much that split them and Bayer Leverkusen. But for me, the Stuttgart team would come 5th. No problems. They had a very decent season that season, and they're much better than the Stuttgart team we see nowadays. This was when Stuttgart were, I wouldn't say in their heyday, but they were still very, very good. You know, they were a very good team back then. Stuttgart for 10 years ago would definitely come 5th in this league, no problem. We're now going to move on to 4th, and I'm going to warn you, 4th is very controversial. Promised you controversy for who I'd put 4th in this league, and here it is. 4th in this league we have Borussia Dortmund. Now, people that know the Bundesliga will be sitting screaming at their computer or phone screen going, but Jack, Dortmund won the league in 10 years ago. That squad 10 years ago was fantastic. Yes, it was a fantastic squad. You had Balashikowski, Lewandowski, Goetze when he was actually an exciting young player, Gundogan. But you also had the managerial genius that is Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp came in, he had this group of what were originally very big egos and wouldn't play as a team. He had that group of players, he bounded them together, he had the dressing room, and he was a very good tactician. He got this team playing some exciting football. Nowadays, Dortmund are A mess at boardroom level, and B, have Terzic, who was Favre's assistant. So basically, Terzic isn't a great managerial mastermind. He's not going to have them playing gegenpressing, anything like that. So the Dortmund team from 10 years ago would come 4th. I'm sorry to Dortmund fans, and I don't feel nice saying it, because this was a very good team. Don't get me wrong, but they're not winning the league. It's just not happening. They're coming 4th. They're barely scraping into Champions League because they just don't have the manager to back it up. They don't have the manager, the support of the board to back it up. And without a good manager, you know, big egos like Lewandowski are not going to play for the shirt. They're not going to play well. That's just the way it's going to work. So yeah, there's my little bit of controversy for today. I have put Dortmund 4th, this Dortmund team 4th. It pains me to do it, but with Terzic, that's just how it was going to work. That's how the cookie was going to crumble. We're now going to move on to who comes 3rd in this league. Coming in at 3rd, above their Ruhr derby rivals, we have Schalke. And I've been very, very boring here because 10 years ago, can you guess, Schalke came 3rd. Now, Schalke had a very, very decent team back then. They were in a bit of a transitional phase, with a few players, good players leaving to go to other clubs. But yeah, Schalke came 3rd that year. Very good players like Kolasinac when he was younger, Weigl, Draxler, some very, very decent players. Fuchs of Leicester City as well. So, Schalke had some great players back then, and I think they come 3rd. They're not going to do any better because of the mess of the backroom team and just everything at Schalke, the financial worries and everything. Just Schalke's boardroom and everything's a mess right now. But they're not going to do any worse because this is a good squad and it could basically manage itself irrespective of what disastrous appointment Schalke put. This team could basically manage itself into 3rd. So I put the Schalke team 3rd. Like I said, can't put them any lower because it was a good team, but yet again, can't put them any higher. So that is Schalke. We're now going to move on to who'd be runners-up 2nd in this league. So runners-up in this league, second we have Borussia Mönchengladbach. Now, they came fourth 10 years ago, but this squad isn't coming fourth. They're a very, very good squad, especially little known player by the name of Marco Reus. I don't know who that lad is, but he played for them back then, looked like a decent player. But yeah, they had Reus along with several other really good players back then. That Mönchengladbach team 10 years ago, again, very exciting to watch. I think it was unfair they came fourth, and with Marco Rosa, who has proven time and time again with good players he can get results, with Marco Rosa at the helm, I think this team would come second. Without a doubt. There's no questions asked. This team would come second. It's not even up for debate that this team would come second. They are, well, it is up for debate, but there you go. Without a doubt, in my mind, this team would come second. Brilliant team. Royce would be carrying them there. Rosa would have them playing some nice, exciting football. They come second. I don't think they get near the title. Now, by this point, I think you've already guessed who's going to win this league. But I don't think they get near the title, but they definitely come second. They definitely be impressive, and they might do decently in Champions League as well. But definitely, Rosa, with managing this team, they'd be runners-up in the league. No questions asked. That's that. So we're now going to move on to who would lift this Bundesliga trophy. And I think we all know who it is, and it's not going to really be a surprise. But let's move on to it anyway. Let's cut on to who would lift our Bundesliga trophy. So winning this Bundesliga, coming first, we have Bayern Munich. I hate to be boring, but you know, it's going to happen. The Bayern Munich squad of 10 years ago was just something else. You had Lahm, Kroos, Schweinsteiger, loads of great players. You know, it was just a really exciting Bayern team to watch. And like I said, if it wasn't for Jurgen Klopp's Dortmund, they would have won the league that year. Simple as that. And in this world where Hansi Flick is the manager, he would guide this team to a league, no problem. Hansi Flick, as much as I don't like Bayern Munich, I've got to say Hansi Flick is a fantastic manager that has guided Bayern Munich to just, you know, he's done a madness with them this season. With the squad from 10 years ago, he'd be doing the treble again, absolutely. Champions League, Pokal League, but more importantly in this situation, the league. Now, I'd say with a 5-point lead, they'll win the league. Mönchengladbach would give them a good, Rosa and Mönchengladbach would give them a good run for their money, but in the end, it would be Bayern Munich that win the league. Like I said, fantastic group of players that year. They were really, really unlucky. I mean, essentially the spine of Germany's World Cup winning team was sort of getting formed at that point. Bayern Munich were just, you know, they were never going to disappoint. Also, Ribéry and Robben as well. Ribéry, when they were in their full prime as well. Hansi Flick's guiding that team to a league title. There's just no questions asked about it there. That's just, you know, simply, it was an amazing team. They were unlucky not to win the league in 11-12. They're going to win the league. They were going to win the league this time round, absolutely, in my mind. Like I said though, it's all based on my opinion. So before we cut to the outro, I would like to do a special shout out, so we will cut to that first. So before I move on to the outro and wrap things up for today, I'd like to give a special shout out to the Down the Slope podcast, who, if you guys follow me on Twitter, would see I was on as a guest on Monday night with the guys. Fantastic podcast. Go on, it's nice and relaxed, and we have a discussion about all things Hibs. Unfortunately, it wasn't for positive reasons that I was on. Unfortunately, we lost against Motherwell, so we gave our analysis over the Motherwell game, but also a preview for the St Johnstone game and Harry's High-B quiz, which is a great laugh. So thank you to the guys for having me on. It was a brilliant laugh. Please follow them on Twitter. Keep an eye out for the podcast. It really is a great laugh. You'll really, really enjoy it. If you're a Hibs fan, you're going to really, really enjoy it. And if you're a football fan in general, it's just lads sitting down talking about their team. And we're really proud to have such a good Hibs podcast. As a High-B, it's great to listen to as well. You get some honest analysis in there. So make sure you go and follow Down the Slope podcast on Twitter, and make sure you listen to them week in, week out to get honest, good analysis of the Hibs games, as well as a good laugh and some great banter as well. So make sure you go and follow Down the Slope on Twitter, and make sure you go and listen to them. And like I said, thank you to them for having me on. It was a brilliant experience, and I had a great time on there as well. So that was my little shout out to Down the Slope. We're now going to cut to the outro for today. So there we go, guys. As voted for by you wonderful people, that was the Bundesliga table if each club had their squad from 10 years ago. I really enjoyed making this video, so thank you to everybody who voted for that option and managed to get it to a win. It was an overwhelming win as well, but yeah, I really enjoyed making this video. It's great to see, that player played there back then, so it was a great wee nostalgia trip. Plus, I like these sorts of things, all these theoreticals and everything, so yeah, absolutely enjoyed making this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it as well. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion in there as well, so I'm looking forward to seeing how the discussion goes as well. So, yep, like I said, I hope you enjoy it. If you disagree, like I said at the start, this is all based on my opinion. If you disagreed with anything that I put in there, I know Dortmund in fourth might be a little bit controversial, then tell me in the comments, where would you put certain teams? I'd like to hear from you guys. Of course, there was a few shocks, like RB Leipzig coming bottom of the league with their 4th division team. It shows you how much they've came along in 10 years. But yeah, that's the video for today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, these sorts of videos always take quite a wee while to make, you know, getting all the graphics made up and everything like that. So I do hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and like I said, get involved in the discussion. Do you agree with what I did? I'm sure a lot of you won't. And who would be top goal scorer in this league? I'd like to hear from you on that one. And do you think that I should do any more videos like that? Of course, you guys enjoy this sort of content, so leave a like. You know the drill. Leave a like if you enjoy this sort of content. Comment if you want to get involved in the discussion. I love hearing from you guys. And as always, guys, I will see you in a while. Jack out.